So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this is on the public build. Actually, this is an old battle replay, and this may very well end up being the last old battle replay that I show. This is of course on the Witch King's Sanctum. We're going to see Mordor and Angmar on the defence, and some of the various forces of the reunited kingdom on the attack. As far as what's going to be coming out soon, I'll go through that a little bit more at the tail end of this battle, I think, in the endgame splash screen, but there is a little bit of uncertainty moving forward because of various things. So I think this is going to be the last battle that I show on the old patch, but necessity may mean that I have to show a couple of more replays from the same source. I think I think it is, yes indeed, it's Colonel Speaks 46, who has sent me a couple of battle replays from this version of the game, very kindly of course, and I may have to dip into them a little bit more so because of a couple of things that are going on at the moment, but we'll see. Again, that's the sort of thing which we'll go into a little bit more detail in after the battle itself. For now we shall focus on the battle here. Witch King's Sanctum is a fairly complicated map. I mean, at first glance it looks fairly unfathomable, but actually, you know, a lot of these lower parts of terrain don't tend to get too involved in terms of how the battle actually pans out, because the defenders are not really going to put their defensive lines too far forwards, especially not when there's only two armies on the defence, as numerous as Mordor and Angmar can be. It's very unlikely to be the case, but evil forces on the defence with their numbers do pose a unique challenge for many attackers, although with 3 human forces they're not going to be super outnumbered, and they do have the quality edge as a general rule. But we'll see. Of course, on this older version of the game, this may very well be the last time that we see the old units for Cardolan get showcased on this channel. Cardolan, of course, may be a little bit less suited for being on the attack than their peers today, purely because of that morale issue. And just in general, they do have some very functional units up front, but unless they can get their crossbows and Dunedain in to support their rank and file, they may struggle a little bit, especially against the more heavy-duty units that Angmar can field. But one way in which, of course, the attackers are going to be very dominant here, Sir Smokes a lot playing as Cardolan here, is going to be at long range. They will be able to get their archers into a good position. I mean, the terrain of the Witch King's Sanctum is pretty extreme, as you can see, so defensive archers will be able to start shooting first, but if they can situate their archers in a good position, all 3 of the attacking forces today should have an edge in terms of their long range capabilities, even with their more basic units like this. Greenway Garrison archers, and also the Minhiriath archers, of course, which will be more comfortable at skirmishing back and forth. I mean, it is only really Mordor that have an archer force to speak of. Angmar, much more about their infantry, and they do have some specialty projectile units, of course, as well, but most of their archers are extremely low quality. Moving over here, Minhiriath Spearmen. The Minhiriath units in general are, again, a functional force, which one-to-one will do decently well against the rank and file of Mordor. Minhiriath Men-at-Arms, of course, being the sword unit version of this. Though it is worth mentioning, of course, on this older version of the game, their numbers have not been bolstered to that extent, so they don't have that little buff that they're working with in the new version. Minhiriath sharpshooters here, of course, have still got those maces, adding that armour piercing to the fray, and of course if the crossbows can get into place and start attacking, then that is going to be one of the main things that Cardolan can really bring to bear alongside their Manatar Romen gatekeepers here. I don't know if they're going to be able to do so. Again, the terrain may work against them in that regard, but it's something that the defenders will need to very much keep in mind. If they're not able to choose their defensive position wisely, then the crossbows are the sort of thing which can make a defensive victory extremely difficult to pull off. Greenway Garrison Footmen, of course, pikes on the attack and on the defence often prove to be very important, but pikes on the attack, they can be shot down by enemy skirmishers a little bit more easily because they have to advance into the line of fire a little bit more so perhaps, but if they can situate themselves, that will really give a little bit of a boost to their basic units forward of them. We also have some Dunedain captains over here, again the old unit model, the vanilla unit model for the Dunedain captains here. Heavy swordsmen, which will do very nicely against many of the basic orcs. And Minhiriath Spearmen as well. There's likely to be hidden units here and there as well. Thieves of Tharbad can hide, Dunedain Rangers and the like. Moving on, we have John playing Arthedain, the sister kingdom to Cardolan. Maybe a little bit more well suited for this sort of thing. They've got a little bit more in the way of morale, of course. They have more variety with their Dunedain units as well, the Peacekeepers being a good example. Very well suited for facing off against the legions of orcs as well. The extra damage that they have from those axes, and of course the extra finesse that they have from just being Dunedain means that it's an all-round win for them. Dismounted Knights of Illuminus, the pinnacle of what Arthedain can field in terms of dedicated infantry, very, very tough. Going to be tough for the Orcs to try and break them down. A couple of units of Arthedain marksmen here as well. Again, going for the basic archers here with the armour upgrade is probably the right call, just because they're going to have long-range dominance if they can get themselves situated, like I said. And if they can't get themselves situated, it doesn't really matter how good your archers are, they'll get slowly whittled down anyway. We've got some upgraded Arthedain pikemen as well, like I said, for the Cardolan pikes, although even more so for the Arthedain ones, because they are a little bit better, especially with that breastplate armour upgrade that they have. If they can get themselves anchored in on the front line, it will be of a great help to the regular Arthedain forces. Dismounted Fornos to Rhine Knights are also a good pick against the Orcs because of the extra damage and extra melee defense that they possess. Wardens of the North, I mean, the armor piercing could be extremely useful, again, if they can get themselves in a good position. They're also very good in melee, so it is all-round a decent unit to bring anyway. Some civilians to help pad out the front line, some Evendim spearmen, several units of fully upgraded Arthedain men-at-arms, so that gives them just that little bit more rigidity, though of course, like I said, the extra numbers that they have in the newer version of the game is very much a better thing to have for them, so they can certainly be counted as being stronger than the Orcs, whereas in this version of the game it's kind of the numbers of the Orcs, but the higher quality of the human units means it's kind of a dead even thing most of the time. You may even give the slight edge to the Orcs depending on what the situation is, although here, because the numbers should be slightly in favour of the attackers, it's a little bit less clear. And then there's another unit of Dunedain Peacekeepers. Finally, the kingdom from the south is also going to be joining in here. We have Smeagol Has a Beard, who is going to be playing as Gondor, fully upgraded Gondor infantry. Similar sort of thing applies to the Arthedain men-at-arms, although even back here, Gondor do have the cheaper armour upgrades, and they do have 2 levels of armour upgrades as well, much like the Arthedainian one, so it actually adds up to be a big saving in the long run. So even though they may not have the increased numbers that they do in the next version of the game, they are at least still a little bit more cost effective than the other basic human sword and board units, several of them here. Marksmen of Caer Andros, I mean, this is technically speaking maybe the last time that we'll see them as an individual unit, because they've kind of been melded into the standard Gondor archers in the next version of the game. But yeah, 2-handed swords in melee, very competent at long range as well. The Veterans of Osgiliath, of course, also have a gold level armour upgrade in the next version, but here they've been fully upgraded to silver as far as they can go in this version of the game, but ultimately they haven't changed too much between the versions anyway. Still locked morale, still very, very resilient in all the ways you want them to be. Guards of Osgiliath, another attacking army that's brought pikes, and again that's a good idea for the reasons I've already mentioned. Fountain Guard, the ever-present in the Gondorian upper echelon, a very, very strong unit, and actually very, very useful against the likes of Angmar for being that really good quality with the armor piercing on the end of those spears as well. Pelagia Marines going to be moving forward to offer a bit of support. I don't know if the Troll Slayers are present for Arthedain. They could be, because they can hide, we can't be sure. But Javelins, of course, can always be a good thing if you're dealing with a dug-in position, which is very likely to transpire in this battle. Not many armour-piercing options for any of the attacking armies today, really. The Axemen of Lasarnak may be the most obvious among the 3 factions, at least in terms of a dedicated infantry unit, but that armour-piercing, of course, will find its home in this battle, most assuredly. Nimrothian Honour Guard and Citadel Guard also possess armour-piercing, though as spears they are maybe a little bit more well-rounded and fit into the standard norms that Gondor tend to have anyway. Now then, moving on to the defenders, we have some forces further forward which seem to be hidden, but anyway, Angmar, played by Hades of the Underworld. Gundabad Guard, strong units on the front line. Of course, strong defensive infantry is something that Angmar don't lack, so they can definitely put on a strong front line. They're more used to perhaps sending those heavily armoured units to try and break a front line rather than be one, but they will still fill that role quite nicely. Upgraded as well, the Guardians of Cardolan, to give them that extra solidity. Of course, it will help them against all of the archers as well, which Angmar don't have a huge amount they can do in terms of dealing with archers other than advancing towards the enemy in their usual fashion. So it's always useful when you can just outlast enemy arrow fire. There's not many factions that you'd want to do that with, but in this sort of scenario, Angmar maybe can get away with it. Witcher-armed pikemen, of course, we already mentioned how the defenders could make good use of pikes. Of course, Mordor don't have any pikes of their own, so the Witcher-armed pikemen are going to have to take up the entirety of the slack in terms of that class of unit, the range that pikes possess. More Witcher-armed pikemen. We've got some Snaga Stalkers hidden among the Angmar Marauders, with more Guardians of Carn Doom. which are on Blackguard, of course, quite similar to the Knights of Innuminus across the way under Arthedain's banner. Very strong unit of sword and board infantry. More Angmar over here. Also, Blackwatch Legion, which usually, you know, they're the bulldozers on the attack, ever the controversial unit type when they fill that role. But here, they're going to be making sure that the enemy can't mass push into them. It's very rare, to be fair, that you would see anyone trying a mass push against Angmar when they're dug in. The Blackwatch Legion just make that completely a no-go. But still, it is something. It adds that mass to the front line. Guardians of Cardolan, we've got the Trolls, of course. The Trolls are one element of Angmar's army that are going to be weaker in this version of the game than in the new patch. Of course, buffed in terms of numbers, and Trolls in general are much more of a threat. Here they will get burnt down pretty quickly by the likes of the heavy swordsmen that Arthedain in particular brought, the heavy axemen of Gondor as well. Moving on to Colonel Speaks' army, he has got some Melkors chosen. I mean, not a huge amount of cavalry. Well, no cavalry for the attacks that we could see, some hidden units maybe, but none of those hidden units will be up to the task of taking the Melkors chosen on in a straight up fight, so cavalry dominance could be the defenders to seize here if they're willing to be bold, but crossbows and armour piercing archers means that breaking cover does come with its risks. Uruk captains, armour piercing included. They're the one unit that has like a sword and shield that includes armour piercing in their repertoire, so that's a little bit unique. We've also got the Nazgul. They can be used a little bit more freely, of course. The general, the other Nazgul, is going to be with the Uruk captains. We've got some Orc javelins. Again, cheap javelins, which usually, again, we're more used to speaking about them in an attacking sense, but not so today. They are going to be attempting to whittle the enemy down as they move forward. The Olai-Kai, of course, who even in this version of the game were the best among the Trolls, but don't expect the all-conquering performances that we have been seeing from them in the new version of the game. Morannon archers, a lot will be put on the Morannon archers' shoulders. If they can have a good battle here, they could blunt the archer dominance that the attackers are clearly hoping to try and gain. Of course, Mordor do have a phalanx unit here in the shape of the Morannon halberds, which come with armour piercing, but they don't have the range that pikes tend to possess, and given how many pikes there are going to be on the attacking army today, if it does come down to a straight infantry slog with no real impacts being seen from any of the ranged units. We didn't see the Witches for the forces of Angmar, but I'd be surprised if they weren't lurking around somewhere. But yeah, if it comes down to a straight up infantry slog, the range of the halberds may get outclassed by the attacking pikes. Orc fodder to help pad out the numbers, more Morannon archers. Temple Guard, of course, means that the Wardens of the North are not the only armour-piercing archer unit on display, and the Temple Guard can be used to greater effect, potentially, given the level of terrain that Mordor can work with. Armour-piercing is, of course, going to be very useful for the defenders, given all of the attacking armies, to one extent or another, is going to rely pretty heavily on their armour for their survivability, and the Sauron's Will can help deal with that. We have the Temple Executioners, another very strong unit of heavy swordsmen, so Mordor, unsurprisingly, when they've got a little bit of extra cash to spend, are going to be going for a lot of their uber-tier units. Mordor at the high end do have plenty of quality after all. Minas Morgul chosen, a good defensive unit as well, a heavy spear unit, going to be doing its best to do its thing. Orc fodder and Morannon halberds could be a couple of extra units lurking around as well, but there will be a little bit of a cut here because I don't know exactly where the defenders are going to set themselves up. That may actually be the most important factor in terms of who goes on to win this battle. If they set up improperly and the defenders start to find gaps, that's where the Orc quality could be exploited. But yeah, the attackers also need to manoeuvre their way into position, and this is a fairly big map, so that'll be interesting. This is going to be a long one as well, potentially, for the swan song of this version of Reforged, so let's see how things get underway, shall we? Perhaps not as much of a cut as I was expecting here, actually, with these Arthedain marksmen getting into place and already loosing a few arrows, although of course as soon as I rejoin, their couple of volleys do seem to have come to a rather abrupt end, but I'm sure that we can simply speed up a little bit more as this battle goes along now. The Melkors chosen, as we mentioned, a real potential problem for the attackers here, as they do give the biggest power spike, especially in this older version of the game, for the defenders to be able to utilise their fast movers a little bit better, and of course the complete lack of cavalry really that we're seeing from the attackers today means that they will be hoping to get themselves into a good setup position fairly early, so that the defenders are then penned up behind their defensive lines. Could be a bit of a double-edged sword for the attackers, that of course, given the heavy numbers that Angmar and Mordor are often capable of bringing. I'm a little bit surprised actually to see that the crossbows weren't moved forward a little bit quicker, because crossbows would be able to punch their way through the high defence that the Melkor's chosen a little bit better than these Greenway Garrison archers will be able to. And you can see they are starting to fall. I mean, this is a pretty high density of arrows after all. And in the long run, I mean, this Melkor's chosen unit isn't really going to be gaining too much in the way of value here. I mean, all of these Minhiriath men-at-arms, even if they were to completely wipe this unit out, cost-wise, that's not really worth the Melkor's chosen's time. But they're still more than healthy enough to be able to keep this up for a little while longer yet. First units starting to clash in melee, infantry to infantry as well, Dunedain peacekeepers with civilians backing them up. I mean, the Barrow Wights in this version of the game, still very much the same sort of thing in the new patch, of course. It's maybe the last time we see this sort of linked green version of them. The damage on the Dunedain peacekeepers is useful, though the extra hit points on these Barrow Wights exactly the sort of thing can allow them to withstand a pretty heavy amount of punishment. Bad guarding behind. I mean, plenty of reinforcements close by, as you would expect for the defenders in a situation like this. I mean, it's a long way for these units over here to go, and of course there's only a little detachment of the Cardolan army as well. Bandits moving up with archers and spearmen, mostly basic units here. My garrison footmen as well, so not having to move an army across just yet, but they will have to at some point, Mordor or Angmar, block that Cardolan advance, otherwise Cardolan could set up a position higher than all of the defenders as they currently are. Melkor's chosen now heading over here as well, by far the most active unit for the defenders so far. I mean, these are pretty thin defensive positions that have been set up so far. Victory still seems certain for the Barrow Wights, very low in terms of mass as well. Probably the one unit, especially when they're isolated like this, that you would probably want to mass push against Angmar with. Whether or not Arthedain have the desire to do that or not is probably looking pretty limited. In all circumstances, it's Discord beeps that intrude upon my recording, but on this occasion, it's WhatsApp. How about that? Smeagol has a beard here is kind of dragging his heels a little bit. I mean, this is one of those situations where this is a longer battle. The attackers don't have any great rush to commit all of their resources right from the off. You do want to be syncing your attacks up maybe a little bit better than we're currently seeing, especially seeing as Gondor do have the luxury in many ways of being able to commit the full might of their army in one position, whereas Cardolan, at least, they do have the excuse, for lack of a better term, of not going all in over here just yet, purely because part of their army is having to move around and go for that flanking move. Meanwhile, Melkor's chosen getting into a good position to charge into these Greenway Garrison archers, the morale tumbling, as you'd expect from Cardolan. Isolated like this though, I don't really know what they were expecting to happen, and over here, so far, we're seeing examples of maybe some newer players committing units in far too smaller numbers to really have too much of an impact on the front lines here of Mordor. Back. Try and finish this unit off completely as well. I doubt these guys will be returning given the extreme casualties they've already suffered under. I mean, Arthedain men-at-arms moving forward, Minhiriath spearmen. Still, these units are not in big enough numbers though. The reinforcements of the defenders are far closer. Reinforcements of the attackers way too far away to be useful here. Yeah, and if I were John, I would not be committing this unit of Arthedain men-at-arms or these Minhiriath spearmen. I would be saving them for later when you're actually ready to mount a sustained assault rather than this. This is suicide, plain and simple. Cardolan archers firing into the Greenway Garrison archers' position with the Melkor's chosen, continuing to charge in, continuing to take losses though. I mean, this is a 2v3, so the defenders don't have too much in the way of margin for error. The shields of the Minhiriath spearmen will serve them well against these rather basic orcish arrows. Our way back over to the front entrance to the Witch King's Sanctum. Arthedain over here, John having, well, he's definitely crafted a more well-rounded initial assault, with Arthane men-at-arms now joining the front line as well with their full armour upgrades. Gondor Guard having to move across to help reinforce the situation over here. Those Nearby Peacekeepers, though, very limited in number now. The hit points of the Barrow Wights proving to be far greater than the additional attack that those axes afford the Peacekeepers. So I'll be very pleased with that. Over here, Gondor infantry still, I mean, starting to make the way over here as well, but once again Gondor making the same errors as the human forces on the other side, where they're committing units piecemeal, and that will allow the defenders to knock them down one by one if this is allowed to continue. We shall see. Further across, High continuing to swing down, and in the end they did mount this ill-advised assault on this front line. It's very well prepared, very easily reinforced front line. Suicide charge, really, from 2 units of basic infantry, and they're sending another one now as well. I mean, if they're not learning their lesson here, they deserve everything they get, the attackers. This has been poor so far from them. Further afield, I mean, Angmar, in spite of the fact that this has been a better attack than the attackers, it's still been fairly comfortable for Angmar. The Barrow Wights not something you can deal with easily. The Gondor Guard a well-rounded defensive unit as well, so they're going to be hoping that they can outlast the rather limp human attack as it has been so far. Citadel Guard have made their way over here now, warmed up. I mean, this level of quality on the front line will certainly not go amiss, but at best it's going to stabilise the situation because of the presence of the trolls of Angmar now on the front line, hoping to twist the knife a little bit in the ribs of the attackers. Enough so far. Irian Spearmen ready to attack again. I mean, Greenway Garrison Archers, we are seeing this is where the attackers could start to come back into it a little bit, with the archers looping their shots. Not the most concentrated fire you'll ever see, but decent so far. And then Fornos to Rhine Knights moving backwards, having taken again more losses over on this side. They have now repositioned themselves, and Melkor's chosen once again, acting as the first line of defence to whittle the enemy down, but Colonel speaks with his units comfortably in place so far. Now also moving forward with the Caragor Riders. Man-at-arms again, leading the way with swordsmen rather than spearmen, and he does have spearmen on hand, so smokes a lot, so it's a little bit surprising that this is what is being allowed to occur. I mean, the Melkor's chosen, slowly but surely, have been closing in on breaking even for their big initial cost here because of the nibbles they've been taking out of various units, and primarily Cardolan infantry so far. Getting forward now, the spears on the front line. With each one of these charges, of course, more of the Caragor Riders do fall, but with each one they're also making good progress. Over here, no reignition of the attack on this side for now. Some Orc fodder have been the target of arrows by the looks of things, which is surprising. Still over here by far and away the most complete assault, although it does look as though Gondor are now taking the primary driver's seat here, as some of the Arthadanian units that still remained are starting to flee. You can see the difference between the trolls' effectiveness in this version of the game compared to the next one. They've fallen away pretty quickly, and that's only likely to be hastened with the arrival of some of these Arthadane swordsmen. A big part of that would have as well been the attacking edge that the armour piercing gives the Citadel Guardsmen. So they'll be doing quite well for themselves. More infantry as well. Decently dependable unit on the front line. As well, some Snaga Stalkers to help reinforce things. Still taking hits. I mean, it's possible that they're trying to go after the Barrow-wights and soften them up, but both of these units really are not ideal targets for archers to be going after. Here he has spearmen trudging forwards as well. With my garrison archers. Temple executioners as well. Still not really ready to recommit over here just yet. I mean, the bandits, they are now committing forward some infantry here. Minhiriath spearmen posting themselves up on this front line. Is that going to make the difference? Probably not in the long run. Given the Barrow-wights' presence, they'll be just fine against the Orc fodder, of course. That superior equipment will give them the edge there, but Orc fodder are hardly the units you want to be scoring your big victories against. Meanwhile, this is much more like it now. I mean, this attack is starting to tick over in the way the attackers would have wanted right from the off. With the Arthedain pikemen now getting into position, the next load of reinforcements from Arthedain after the Gondorian wave, and you can see that consistent progress being made, consistently killing off more and more of these defensive units. Snaga Stalkers defeat seems certain. At the back, Minhiriath sharpshooters definitely being the, or have been the target of defending skirmishers, which is completely understandable. Getting rid of DPS that crossbows can do is a pretty big deal, but the crossbows will be returning fire in kind. Barrow-wights still getting hit. I mean, the Olag High being committed now. We saw how the Trolls of Angmar fell away pretty quickly, but the kind of opposition they're going up against here is fairly ideal for the Trolls. These units are not really going to be able to fight back with any great gusto, so a good commitment here by Mordor. The bandit javelins colliding with Barrow-wights in behind, so they are at least scoring hits, the bandits. Whether or not this is going to be the be-all and end-all remains to be seen. Further afield, another wave of units. I mean, again, the reinforcements are so far away. You can understand why, because this effectively is like a moat, isn't it? Where you have the low ground, enemy archers are going to be able to do some good damage to you on the approach. But one thing that I don't think the attackers have really taken into account here is the fact that Mordor do have a few archers, and indeed the Temple Guard are very dangerous, but Mordor and Angmar as a unit, it's not exactly the most dangerous archer force. It's not as if you're facing off against a Lothlorien Mirkwood combination. Like going down there and keeping your reinforcements down there is probably not the best of ideas, because they will get shot up and the damage will be pretty hefty. As it is, though, I think they could have gotten away with having their reinforcements a little closer, and it would have been keeping this attack going a little bit better than it has been. Warns of the North firing away, trying to reduce the strength of this unit of Blackwatch Legion. You can see there is a bit of a wholesale retreat going on now. So the first line is compromised. They don't want to commit any more units really to this position over here, I think, is the thing. And I think they're right about that, the defenders. I mean, this position is being overrun. There's no point in committing more resources to it needlessly. Seems certain for the Barrow-wights, but they will at least act as the best kind of speed bump in this kind of rearguard action situation. A couple of units of Barrow-wights in the way. It's going to take the attackers a while to be able to clean this situation up. This, of course, will be an excellent thing for the attackers, though, because it means that over here they can commit units forward now and claim some more territory, though the Melkor's chosen continuing to slowly but surely ratchet up that cost efficiency as this battle goes along. Meanwhile, over here, fairly decent number of units from Cardolan that were sent across over here, of course. Only one unit of Minas Morgul chosen in the way for the time being, but spear to spear they are superior to the basic Minhiriaths, which they find themselves fighting off against for now. orc javelins. Taking a few hits. Sauron's will. Iron archers in position as well. We have to do decent damage. So far content to leave it. The javelins, on the other hand, exactly the sort of thing which will be good at reducing the effectiveness of the pikes that are now freshly arrived on the front line. Some good hits. Nazgul on the way back. Well, all of these reinforcements means that Cardolan are not going to be breaking through here anytime soon because of the transitioning back up the hill which the defenders are currently undergoing. Meanwhile, not a huge rush for the attackers, wanting to again clean up these barrow wights, and that's something they have to do. They can't just allow these barrow wights to feast upon their back line because they were in too much of a hurry to charge up the hill. But of course there is no quickly dealing with the barrow wights, although admittedly you would be able to deal with them perhaps a little bit more quickly if it weren't regular Gondor infantry that were the ones tasked with engaging them in melee. Very little remnants of these bandit units, which most of their javelins of course were committed against the barrow wights initially. I'd be very surprised if they didn't flee in the face of this kind of pressure. Gondor infantry. And the barrow wights that were over here, of course, right from the beginning of the game, slowly but surely being taken out, but have had to deal with more high quality units in general, as well as still units way back there as well. From pretty much every attacking army, they've got units in the far-flung edges of the settlement. Arnor archers. The longer they dawdle, of course, if there are any units in range, this is where the Morannon archers can gain a little bit of effectiveness. This Mordor chosen still doing their thing. Remains of the Olag High being committed over here after the softening up of the javelins. Javelins indeed still doing their thing. Fodder being committed as well, so the Minas Morgul chosen acting as a good defensive screen. Now reinforcements in melee, range support, and some pretty heavy melee support as well from what remains of the Olag High. And it's continuing to do their thing. Further back, Minhiriaths, the archers, the men-at-arms, Sauron's will. Very comfortable so far, at least in defending the upper reaches of the settlement. I mean, I think this is the only pathway that the attackers can take, at least from the front here. In fact, just in general, I think that is the only other way up onto this bit of terrain. Again, it is a complicated map, this one, but it's not quite the labyrinth that it may initially seem. Meanwhile, should probably be using those sharpshooters, honestly, to deal with these barrow wights a little bit more quickly. It would be the most efficient way to deal with them. Pin them in place in melee with the infantry we've got at the moment for sure, and then just shoot them like fish in a barrel as it is now. Meanwhile, it's actually going to be the defenders with their goblin trackers up on the hill that are going to be sending their projectiles in. And I mean, goblin trackers are low tier archers at best, but going after Greenway Garrison footmen is the best way really for dealing with that. I mean, not the charge that Colonel Speaks would have been hoping for there from the Malcolm's chosen, but the Wardens of the North exposed like this. Not surprised maybe that he decided to try and go after them. Maces being swung Sharpshooters getting into position. Are they actually going to fire though? It doesn't look like it. And still, those reinforcements are very, very far away. Gondor at least are now moving their units in their entirety. Gondor's still reasonably healthy, of course. I mean, most of the heavy lifting from this initial assault was done by Arthedain, and they were also sending over a little bit of support to Cardolan. So late game Gondor are going to have the hopes of the team on their back, I think, given the additional strength they still have to work with, both in terms of numbers and in terms of infantry quality. Ever the important factor in a siege battle like this. Well, still one Olag High remains, and most of that has to do, I think, with the fact that most of these Cardolan units that have been committed are not the best in terms of their sheer attacking value. Bandits, Imperiath men-at-arms, and the sheer numbers that Mordor have, they're going to be quite comfortable with keeping Cardolan at arm's length here. The attackers are going to need to start putting pressure elsewhere for this little side offensive to truly have the kind of impact they want it to. Guard, waiting with anticipation to use their own steel bows. And still these Barrow-wights, technically, I mean, victory seems certain. And they've been stumbling an awful lot in this battle, I think, the attackers. It's not been the cleanest of performances, but perhaps in a 3v2 that's what it takes to make the battle a little bit more competitive. Arthedain marksman just having a little cursory glance. I mean, Guards of Osgiliath in the late game could be incredibly useful in conjunction with the Fountain Guard and the Nimlothians, outlasting the enemy in an infantry fight when it comes to quality is something that Gondor can do against many. We'll see. Good amount of defences dug in now from Angmar. This of course means that Angmar will be pretty comfortable even in the event that, I mean, look at this, I mean, Minhiriath archers, one unit of Minhiriath men-at-arms. This is no longer the kind of force which can really do much of anything. They are just going to throw in what they have left here, Cardolan, but they will go the same way as the troops that have already been here, unfortunately for them. So a long way in this battle to go though, but I think if you were the defenders you'd be feeling pretty happy about how things have gone thus far. Minhiriath men-at-arms. Still not committing more reinforcements over here either to try and deal with the situation. Still content to allow the bleeding of ever more valuable manpower. Hoping that the pikes will be able to keep them at bay, but I mean that hasn't really proven to be the case so far. And of course, if this becomes a one choke point kind of battle, that will always favour the defenders, regardless of whether they're elves, men, dwarves, or orcs. Lothian Honour Guard. Loitering with intent. 64 of them, I mean, they could yet prove to be very important. I mean, this Gondorian Archer Corps with ammunition, and also all of them accomplished melee fighters as well. This could be their ticket back into things. I mean, it is at least a good thing that now all of the reinforcements are starting to make their way forwards. Sharpshooters now getting involved as well. I mean, I don't really think the Barrow-wights are going to be too concerned about maces being the big difference makers. Wards of the North creeping their way forwards as well. I mean, this surely is enough to garner a response. Finally, the Melkor's chosen do fall. I think Colonel Speaks will be reasonably happy with what they've done. I think they probably just about broke even, but just in general, the harassment and the time save, that's not something that you can put a price on, really. You just have to judge based on the outcome of the battle whether they were worth it, and I think we can definitely say the Melkor's chosen were worth it. Well, very little remains of this ill-fated Cardolan expedition. Getting ground down ever more. I mean, to be fair, morale actually hasn't been too bad for Cardolan here. It's one thing that people will always point out when it comes to their effectiveness on the field. However, on this occasion, not too bad. Not too bad at all. Their effectiveness actually in terms of the tactics used and how they've been in melee against Mordor and Angmar is a different matter. They've been given a bit of a schooling in that regard so far in this battle, but maybe the additional army will still be enough to see the attackers through this storm. They are starting to waver now, although in this situation when they're faced with overwhelming numbers and also quality units like the Nazgul in and amongst them, this is the kind of situation where any faction's basic mainline infantry is going to start to falter, you would think. And there they go. Sauron's will. And now, actually we will have to go up to ×2 speed, because I think, well, actually no, technically not, there is still a fight going on. Finally the Barrow Wights are now getting taken down, and a large part of that will be the commitment of the Dunedain captains, this level of quality, as well as the sharpshooters, just for sheer numbers. Finally breaking the back of this resistance, but maybe making a little bit more of a fuss over it than was truly necessary. But we shall see how things develop. Infantry trudging across. Lothian on a guard as well. Crossbows getting into position. I mean, all of these ranged units going to try. They don't really have the angle. Trying to angle their shots. Many of them will hit the dirt right in front of them. Some of them will hit, but again, Minas Morgul chosen from the front. Upgraded Guardians of Khan Doom from the front. These are the kind of units that are going to be able to absorb that kind of arrow fire all day long. So not a huge amount of trouble ahead, you would suggest, for the defenders so far. Blackguard. Utter defeat for the Cardolan units over there. And what's happening? Guardians of Khan Doom fleeing from these Axemen of the Sarnak. I mean, they do have this Citadel Guard. I mean, this is another pathway. I mean, not really. This doesn't really gain them a great deal. It's another pathway to help take that initial defensive point, but they're still going to have to go up that one choke for that to actually mean anything. I mean, these Guardians of Khan Doom are in trouble, though. It's actually one of the first times we may see these lower sections used as the Guardians of Khan Doom try to flee from the Axemen. I mean, actually, you know what? Without support, the Axemen of the Sarnak will do a lot of damage initially, and the armor piercing, of course, will be useful, but the numbers discrepancy means it's going to be a Pyrrhic victory, I think, one way or the other. The lower defensive abilities of Axemen means you really need to use them in a combined arms setting to really get the most out of them. I think the time's come for a bit of ×2 speed as well, given the situation as it is at the moment. I think the attackers are going to try and slowly whittle the defenders' numbers down a little bit more and then try and leverage that extra army of theirs to smash them to splinters, but whether or not they're going to be able to do that, I don't know. Moran on Archers also taking their pick, really, of the attackers as they organise themselves. This is, of course, the right of any defending army. These Orc Javelins are in a good position as well. I mean, they've chosen their positions well, the defenders. I do think the attackers have given them some pretty significant help with the way they've decided to approach things in this battle so far, but you can only beat what's in front of you. So far, defenders have done a very reasonable job of that indeed. Civilians, the first ones in. Who are the real villains here? Sending forward farmers and their wives as the first wave into heavy Orc infantry. These all chosen Guardians of Cardolan. Javelins not yet utilising any of their projectiles. Back. Fodder getting committed to the front line as well. I mean, Guardians of Cardolan actually not getting thrown in just yet. I mean, this Mordor shows that maybe not in the best defensive shape, but I mean, yeah. The lowlier units with lower morale, I mean, this is going to exhaust a lot of these attacking infantry units very, very quickly because they're having to fight up a very steep incline. And now the Javelins are starting to make their presence felt as well. The arrival, I think, of some Arthur-named pikemen on the front line necessitates a little bit of fire support. I mean, it's a perfect position for these Javelins to be in as well. Those cheap Javelins, time and time again, have proven their worth. Now they get to do so once more. Whittling down those attacker numbers ever more so. In fact, feeling confident enough to only do some light support and then leave the rest for the infantry to deal with afterwards. I mean, the fact that it's come down to this, where there's only one choke point being pressured, I mean, if they'd managed to link up the attack with a more substantial Cardolan force over there, it would have been different. They would have had two positions they would have had to commit units to, but now because there's only one, they can pretty much throw units in. Just try and, because I don't think there's many other defensive positions on this map that are better. I mean, of course there is. Most of the times we've seen this map in the past, it has come down to this one over here. This last little defensive plateau at the top, and the path up to it has often been the final stand on this map. But I don't think you actually... I think this may be even better, to be honest, because you get a better position for your ranged units, such as they are for Mordor and Angmar. No witches, though. I think in the case of this battle, I think it's probably best that we don't see the witches, just because a few telling hits from them would probably make this something of a walkover for the defenders from this point onwards. Look at what's actually carrying Orc fodder. Many of them, wooden planks for shields, regimented than we're used to seeing the Orc fodder, perhaps, as we're used to seeing them charge into more well-prepared Arnorian infantry defensive lines rather than it being the other way round. Counter-attack as well with the Blackwatch Legion perhaps when the time is right. Around on halberds on the way across to help shore things up. Oh, hang on a minute. Yeah, okay. They are here. That's unfortunate. I wonder what's going to happen with them. I mean, this is the perfect position to use the witches in. I think witches or no witches, it's a tough task for the attackers from here. Brown and Archer's in a good position, but I mean, as soon as they bunch up too much on this front line, there's no real way for them to get hit with projectiles at this point either. You're going to have to arc your shots a lot, which is what the attackers are trying to do, but is there really going to be much they can do to stop them? And to the north, firing their projectiles in as well. They could use their ammunition now, really, and the sheer numbers damage they would do, I think, would probably be worthwhile. Still all of them alive. I mean, they do still have a decent amount of hit points. It's why really only concentrated fire works rather than this desperation that the attackers seem to be engaged with at the moment. Goblin trackers also there. The witches are here. Yeah. So that's going to be significant. And there's not really much they can do about it here. And that is a huge rout as well, as a result of the green fire raining down upon them. I think from this point on I would be extremely surprised if the attackers were able to come back and be competitive in this battle. Still a lot of heavy orc infantry standing in their way. Not everything routed, to be fair, to give this unit of Arthane men-at-arms their credit. They are standing and fighting. Arthane marksmen still doing their best to try and do some damage in return. Dunedain Rangers, of course, this being the old version of the game, body-piercing projectiles, but again, the angle very much not on their side, really. Veterans for Skiliath, still Moran on archers, in a pretty good position over here, really. Just as they run out of ammunition, how typical. But yes, another 80 units that can be committed as makeshift infantry. Will they need makeshift infantry, I think, is the interesting question from here on out. Pikeman's still there, of course, another defensive tool which will be very good to use later on. Arthane men-at-arms on their way forward. How much more, or how many more of this style of attack do the attackers still have left in them? This is a little bit more substantial, maybe. That one unit of men-at-arms now being supplemented by peacekeepers, by Gondor infantry. Pikes returning. I think all of those units that did return from routing are now back, and they're just being thrown back in to help bulk out those numbers. Guardians of Khan Doom fleeing the scene. Doom. I mean, they are starting to push through the initial defensive line, so reinforcements may be caught a little bit flat-footed from a defending perspective. Not all is lost, but the attackers will need this momentum to continue. All javelins in position once again. Goblin trackers will be able to hit the backs of these units as well, where their shields will not be coming into effect, so they'll be completely reliant on their armour to deal with those goblin arrows. Temple Guard doing their thing. The witches, I mean, they only have one volley as well, so they could be recommitted at any moment, and that would, of course, truly put the attackers in the bin, you would suggest. Halberdiers, pikes now being sent forward as well to try and maybe slap down any newfound hope the attackers may have. I mean, those armor-piercing arrows, of course, going to be absolutely devastating. I mean, attacking something like the Dismounted Knights of the Luminous would probably be worthwhile. The routing going on, I mean, like I said, Cardolan actually, when they were on the field, weren't really subject to a huge amount of routing until the end. I mean, in this sort of situation as well, though, it's not too surprising Arthedain and Gondor are starting to flee given the situation that is in front of them. Do they have the ability to reorganise at this point? I don't know. You still have units sequestered away down here. That one unit of Guardians of Cardoon making their way around to flank. 2 routing Greenway Garrison archers. Still a decent amount of reinforcements to be committed. Guards of Osgiliath. A lot of Gondorians, but I mean, when exactly are they going to be committed? Time is running out. This front line is looking very sad, really, isn't it? Gondor infantry committing forward, but again, these piecemeal commitments wasn't so much the case in the middle of the battle, but now, as we start to head towards the final phases, and back at the start as well, it's been a massive Achilles heel of the attackers in this battle. Sadly for them, those Temple Guard, it'd be interesting to see how many kills they have come the end of this one. In a perfect position to use all of their arrows, indeed assassinating the Arthedanian general as well, and they can of course get involved in melee and be very effective there as well. Time will tell. Victory seems certain at the moment. Unsurprising routing from the Gondor infantry, given the pressure they're under. Citadel Guard made of sterner stuff, but also very much in danger of going the same way. Uriath sharpshooters reloading, threatening to fire in. Legion here in numbers. Temple Guard. Still not doing much. I mean, to be fair, this one unit of Guardians of Cardoon, which is acting as a bit of a flanking force, they're going to want to wait a little bit until Gondor have sent forward their next wave, which looks as though it is going to happen, because one unit of Guardians of Cardoon against the very best Gondor have to offer, it's not exactly going to be the best of fights for them to take, although I guess they can afford to be a little bit frivolous at this point, the attackers, given the victories they've had in this battle so far. Osgiliath going to make their way up. Are they going to just send forward one unit again? Please don't. Not again. Surely you will have learned your lesson by now. Okay, Gondor infantry going with at least. It's still not enough, but it's better than one unit. It's coming in. Goblin trackers as well. I mean, the Goblin trackers have been pretty much as deadly as it's possible for a unit like that to be. That will be intriguing to see if they've managed to do anything. Something went a little bit weird with my audio there, but it seems to have sorted itself out. Gondor infantry fleeing pretty much as soon as they made it to the front line. Guards of Osgiliath. Again, a unit made of sterner stuff, but again being asked with facing down the entire force of Sauron's army. Sauron and his Witch King henchmen, I guess, but unimportant really here. Goblin trackers once again, putting extra pressure on this attacking force. Guardians of Cardoon still there as well. Axemen of Lasarnak scurrying around. Citadel Guard being committed as well. I mean, quality isn't really the problem. Cardolan, with what they have left to them as well, Dunedain captains now being sent in as the final 10k frames, excuse me, is now upon us. Forces evenly matched. And this is pretty much everything that the defenders still have, but the quality they have left to them, the defensive position they have left to them, the supports they have left to them, surely it's going to be too much. We will. I mean, based on how simplistic this fight is, everything that's worth seeing is happening really within camera shot. We may as well go up to ×2 speed, I think. Axemen of Lasarnak arriving. You can see the Blackwatch Legion, their mass pushing capabilities now. I mean, it's a bit much maybe to call it a full-on counter-attack, but it's definitely counter-push. Trying to weave their way in behind enemy lines, these Dunedain Rangers, but there's heavy infantry waiting for them, so it's not really going to gain them much of anything. The anchor that these Witch Realm pikemen provide, it's pretty much ideal for what you would want as a defender at this point. This is probably the only moment in the battle now that's going to be a little bit... well, the only action that's going to happen outside of that one choke point is going to be the pouncing of this one unit of Guardians of Cardoon that was sent around, going after the marksmen of Caer Andros. I think the numbers discrepancy, again, they may be a two-handed swordsman in melee, but they are an archer as their main focus, the marksmen of Caer Andros. So the Guardians of Cardoon, with that armour upgrade, their defensive abilities, their numbers, all of the things that give Angmar as a faction their strength should be enough to give them the victory. If that remains 1-1, they could send over a bit of support, which I think they're doing, and Fountain Guard and support would turn that battle on its head pretty much immediately. But and we return to see another smouldering crater created by the Witchers. Unfortunate for them. Well, unfortunate for the Gondorians, for the Witchers of course. We don't really know if they're the sort of thing that would feel happiness, but as close as they get to it, I suppose. Javelins floating in, arrows finding their marks. Guards of Osgiliath trudging their way up the hill as well. Trying to keep this assault going. I mean, it is a reasonably close fight in terms of the numbers that are still available. It goes to show how difficult, I think, the task can be when you're outnumbered by an army. This, I mean, you may as well, I mean, Guardians of Cardoon are a relatively simplistic unit in terms of what they're all about, so their effectiveness in the kind of situation they were put in least distracting some of the extra Gondorian strength, which, to be fair, Fountain Guard on the front line, given how this fight is heading towards a slightly closer end than maybe you would have expected initially. Buying time in this way, certainly not a waste. Which seems certain for the marksman of Caer Andros. Veterans of Osgiliath offering what support they can. I mean, they're pretty much throwing everything they can in now. The quality of these units, I think, is going to be the main issue. They have got Nimlothians at the centre of things, but regular Gondor infantry, Pelagia Marines, Arthedain Marksmen, the numbers look okay, but the actual content of those numbers perhaps a little bit less so. And the quality of the defenders, meanwhile, Temple Executioners in there, as well as probably the Temple Guard, indeed, adding a few more numbers to that impressive kill count I'm sure they have already. The brave last stand of these Guardians. The Axel and the Sarnak routing, weirdly enough. That isn't, I don't think, from the Guardians. I think that's from the fight further up the hill, and that was simply the route they were taking to retreat back from whence they came. Still fated assault will allow the Witch King to regather his forces and launch a new invasion of fractured Arnor, I'm sure, even with support from their sister kingdom of the south, Gondor. Not enough. These units can now be recommitted, though, with the final defeat of those Guardians of Khan Doom. A lot of these units now, however, running in the wrong direction. Up to ×2 speed, I think. Javelins arcing their shots. Away now go the Gondor infantry. Trackers and committed to melee as well. Their reward for doing so well in this fight is to be sent into a melee engagement where many of them will still perish because of their very low level of quality. Everything they still have remaining to them being sent in, Sauron's Will, Temple Executioners and Temple Guard. All of the two-handers, the high-end two-handers of the Mordor army, still there. That will make them far too much for what remains of Gondor. Like I said, Gondor having by far the most strength coming into this final phase of the battle, but nowhere near enough of it, I don't think, to have ever made a truly meaningful impact on its outcome. Alas. Another death, another general death. Fountain Guard shaken. You know, it's a pretty bad situation when some of your very best are thinking of fleeing. Still, I mean, in terms of the percentages, it's going to continue to, the gap is going to continue to grow. I think it will be beyond 10% by the time the battle is finished, but close. It'll be, you know, around 12% the differential, which it does go to show. It's probably one of the better examples of how having an extra army can really make a big difference in this sort of situation. It does make the defenders' job hard, because even when they played really quite well, even when the attackers were making many missteps, it was a difficult situation to draw themselves out of. Obviously the quality is always going to be questioned when the orcs are the ones that are having to defend, but when they do have money to their name, it is a situation where Mordor can be especially deadly. Witches, once again, I think even without the Witches, it would have been maybe closer in terms of the out-and-out numbers that we were seeing, but it definitely wasn't the be-all and end-all here. It's just been a bit of a knife twister, the Witches, more than anything. Another death of a general. I think that was Cardolan's actually, which was weird. Still just about alive. The one Dunedain captain that was left with him, fleeing the scene disgracefully. Is the forces evenly matched? Now a downhill charge from what remains. Going to try and deal with what's left. You know, all these crossbows again didn't really have the angle, which was always going to be a problem. Though with this, in this situation, with a counter-attack, they may be able to ratchet up a decent amount of kills for themselves. Temple Guard finding themselves partially right at the front once again. And kills for them, as finally the counter-attack has now broken. And they will be trying to wipe the hillside clean of all of the free peoples of Middle-earth, before, I'm sure, reorganising themselves and getting ready for a renewed invasion southwards. Mechanical clank of those crossbows, but the time they have to get as many bolts down range is going to be very short indeed. Guard holding back the entirety really of the Mordor force, broken, and they were fighting to the death, but now they are going to rout instead. Final 1,000 frames now as Mordor and Angmar surge forward to complete their victory. Yeah, 15%-ish going to be by the end. Witches pushing it a little bit further in favour of the defenders. Perfect position to use the witches from as well, so you'll scarcely find a more effective use of the witches on the defence. This Arnor gatekeeper is going to be the last ones left, interestingly enough. Actually, no, they're not broken and fighting to the death, so something else still lives. As one by one the attackers start to admit defeat. There we have it. That is going to be that. And definitely the right team won this one. I think you would agree in terms of the performance that both sides put on. I think some newer players, so I haven't seen Sir Smokes a lot before, but still, it is what it is. Yeah, let's see what did the damage for Mordor. Are at captains, not a huge amount. Nazgul 312, very impressive actually from the Nazgul. They were going up against that side attack from Cardolan primarily, and then they were presumably involved in that fight on the hill as well, though they blend in so well because of the small unit size. So 312, another message ding there. 228 kills for the Temple Guard, good amount of kills from the Minas Morgul Chosen. 423 from the Olag High. It's probably one of the better performances from Trolls that we've seen in this version of the game. So, in what will be their swan song, I guess. And the Melkor's Chosen 150, not too bad either. Very much a fixture in the early game. Of course, we won't be able to tell what did the damage for Angmar, but Mordor doing the lion's share of the work in terms of kills. Angmar much more as a defensive bulwark. They do work together pretty well, considering the fact that they do have many of the same strengths, Mordor and Angmar. They go about it in slightly different ways. As for the attackers, like I said, they needed to link up their attacks a little bit better on a macro sense, and on a micro sense they needed to commit more units to each of their attacks, especially early on. Sending forward individual units to their inevitable demise is never going to go too well, and they found themselves in a situation ultimately as a result of not syncing themselves up too well, where there was only one choke point they could attack up, and that's never a good sign when you're on the attack against defenders, because the defenders are always going to have some good quality. Even when they're the orcs, they're going to be able to use good quality to their advantage in that kind of situation when the battlefield is made that small, and that was ultimately their undoing. So yeah, big thank you to Colonel Speaks 46 for sending this one in. Big thanks to all the players as well for being a part of this battle replay on the old version of the game. I did mention at the start that there was going to be some sort of, well, there was some news to bring across, and I think what I'm going to do actually is I think I'm going to do a dedicated channel update video for that. Because it is important. Ultimately, it's a situation which has arisen, which basically means it's completely out of my control, effectively, but I will need to... The channel is going to be directly impacted as a result, and it's going to be impacted basically for an indeterminate amount of time, because it's finally the case, really, that the consistent non-public nature of the next patch, it's finally going to have an impact on the channel, and that will basically continue until the new patch is made public. The player base, the main thing that I've always said is the player base being as fractured as it is has proven to be a problem for Reforged, and that has become even more of a problem in the course of the last few weeks. And basically, until the new patch becomes public and everyone can just get on the same version, regardless of permissions and all of this, stuff, that way everything can flow as it should, and Reforged will get that much needed shot in the arm that it needs. But as a result of various things, which I don't even know the circumstances of, really, I mean, it all seems a little bit nonsensical. But like I said, I think I'll do a channel update video. I won't go into too much of the details regarding the people involved, because there's no need for that. It's really just the situation as a result of what's happened relating to the channel, which I care about. And it's the only thing really relevant for here anyway. But yes, the short version is there may be gaps in the schedule. There may be the necessity to pivot the channel to keep it, going if necessary. But one way or another, there is going to be a lack of Reforged content as a result of this. So yeah, I think a channel update probably on the following Wednesday after this replay comes out is what can be expected. So yeah, I hope you'll join me for that, because it is quite relevant. But yeah, big thanks to all the players, like I said, for this battle. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next, whatever that may be.